Hey y'all, Anthony Fantano here, internet's scratchy throat music nerd, and it's time for a review. Lupe Fiasco, Food and Liquor 2, The Great American Rap Album, Part 1. Lupe Fiasco is a Chicago rapper who made a pretty nice entry into the hip-hop industry with a debut album that was lauded as just one of the best hip-hop albums of 2006. This album was filled with catchy, emotive production from the likes of Kanye West, Soundtrack, the Neptunes, even Linkin Park's Mike Shinoda produced a track for this thing. And of course, Lupe brought maybe what he is best known for, his very sharp, thought-provoking lyricism with a very socially conscious edge. It was just awesome to see somebody so high up in the hip-hop industry with hit singles like Kick Push and Daydreamin', but also had kind of a refreshing perspective. You know, wasn't rapping about the same stuff that everybody else was. Now, the very next year, Lupe put out another LP, The Cool. This album featured way more production from Soundtrack. Lupe lyrically was getting a bit more bold, a bit more maybe preachy in a sense. And he took a more conceptual route with the overall theme of the album. And I feel like his more topical tracks on this LP were way more pointed, like the song Hip Hop Saved My Life. This LP is not as celebrated as Food and Liquor, and of course there are reasons. I mean, it's not as immaculately produced. You know, definitely some questionable decisions, I guess, on this album, but nobody saw what was coming down the pipe with what Lupe did last year with what was his latest album, Lasers. The LP had a lot of pre-release drama. The album's coming out. Oh wait, it's not coming out. Then he claimed that his label made him make decisions that he wouldn't have made otherwise in regards to the hooks or the instrumentals. No matter what the drama or the real story was, what the end result was on Lasers was basically a socially conscious hip-hop album, yes, but with some very glitzy, electronic, and kind of sterile instrumentals that made Eminem's Recovery look like it went as hard as Death Grips. Lyrically, Lupe was still on point, sure, you know, you couldn't really knock a lot of his messages on these tracks, and there were some decent singles on here, like the pretty inspirational The Show Goes On. But these pop beats are just too sweet on the ears, not really representative of the urgency of some of the situations that Lupe was rapping about, especially when you're getting these very bright, loud, auto-tuned choruses on the track Beautiful Lasers. I mean, that just really kind of made songs on here, despite what Lupe was saying, kind of unlistenable. I kind of feel the same way about the track State Run Radio. I mean, you know, I could really agree with what a lot of Lupe is saying on here, but, you know, I'm not into music for just the philosophy of it, you know? I mean, I could totally agree with you, and that's cool. You could be making a point that I am 100% behind, but if it doesn't sound good, I mean, you know, then I'm not liking it. You know, nothing against your ideology, but I'm not liking your music. And I feel like ever since the release of Lasers, Lupe has kind of been in the midst of damage control. He put out the Friend of the People mixtape shortly after the release of Lasers, and that mixtape ironically featured him rapping over more electronic beats, which I previously thought were being forced upon him on Lasers. But now, about a year later, we have a new full-length album whose title evokes Lupe Fiasco's most celebrated album, Food and Liquor. Specifically, Food and Liquor 2, The Great American Rap Album, Part 1. The Part 1 is really there, and I'm sure eventually we're going to get to Lupe Fiasco, Food and Liquor 2, The Great American Rap Album, Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. You know, usually I could just totally give a shit in terms of what the album title is with an LP, but there's just so much pretense that comes with this title. Not only does the title imply that this LP is going to continue upon what made Food and Liquor great, but The Great American Rap Album, Part 1? Well, I feel like I can confidently say that this is not really a continuation of Food and Liquor. And if it is, it's really one of those movie sequels where 90%, maybe 95% of everyone involved is like completely gone. The lead role, Lupe, is still there, but we've got different directors. The love interest we remember from the last movie is like a completely different woman. She was like a blonde in the first movie, and now she's like a redhead, and they're just kind of crossing their fingers and hoping that no one notices. And the fact that we do have a beat from soundtrack on the second song here is really the only thing production-wise that makes this album resemble Food and Liquor. The biggest issue with this album, and it continues to be an issue with Lupe, is the production. A lot of the instrumentals on this thing sound like they would have been popping behind gangster rap club hits in the mid or early 2000s. The beats on this thing, with the exception of a few, are just really forgettable, bland, and kind of generic. Thin and just not a lot of punch, not a lot of energy to them. Though they are not as bright or flashy or electronic as Lasers, I do think they're as poppy. Despite the fact that what a lot of Lupe is saying is real, I feel like musically and instrumentally, he sugarcoats it all the way. I do like the soundtrack instrumental on Strange Fruition, even though a lot of people kind of had some drama over the Pete Rock inspired sample on the track Around My Way, and I don't really think that sample was executed in the most tasteful way possible. I mean, the beat is a little bland. I do like the fact that they are kind of tributing, that era of hip hop with that song. And the instrumental behind the track Cold War is pretty great too. I like the breathy vocal sample on there, and Jane totally just murders that hook with some very powerful and passionate vocals. But outside of that, tracks like Bitch Bad, I mean, the instrumental on that thing just sounds so kind of cheap, thrown together, not really all that detailed. Same thing with a track like Lamborghini Angels. I don't like that instrumental at all either, and if there's one thing that disappoints as much as the instrumentals on this thing, it is the hooks. Like on the track Itao, which kind of comes out right at the gate with this LP, where Lupe Fiasco really says, "and some kisses for the babies?" Like, is he for serious? I know the song has positive vibes. It's well intended. It's wishing the world were a better place. It's optimistic. It's idealistic. But could Lupe have maybe tried, either instrumentally or lyrically, to make that idea sound maybe a little less corny than it actually is? And when he's singing that hook later on the track with the auto-tune, it just sounds terrible. The track Heart Donor has a terrible hook as well, and the songs Unforgettable Youth and Battle Scars actually kind of sound like hooks that would make it onto an Eminem LP, one of his new ones. It's definitely not as shockingly bad as Lasers, but maybe that's only because the shock is kind of worn off at this point. I mean, if there's anything I can applaud on this album, it's the lyrics. I did like a lot of Lupe's lyrics on Lasers, but what kind of makes this LP better than Lasers is that you can actually hear them a lot of the time, whereas the production on that last LP was overshadowing him at points. I do really like Lupe's verses on the track Lamborghini Angels, where he is throwing some really sharp and pointed criticisms at religion. And I like the way how Lupe has 3 verses that tell kind of 3 sides to the story in the track Bitch Bad, and then he just kind of ties them together at the end. There are times when I do kind of feel like Lupe takes his point and he kind of just beats the listener over the head with it, as opposed to being abstract, maybe kind of letting people come to their own conclusions. I'm not really sure how much further I can kind of go on with this album. I mean, I'm just going to keep running around in circles at this point if I talk anymore. Yeah, I can keep praising and keep talking about lines that Lupe spits out and song concepts that he pulls together on this album. The track Hood Now is great. So is Cold War. So is Around My Way, lyrically, but I'm just not liking the instrumentals on a majority of this album. They really just kind of take the energy and the power out of a lot of what Lupe is saying. I mean, there is more urgency and passion in the slam poetry on the track Aisha Says that kicks this album off than a lot of these songs with Lupe rapping over these weak instrumentals. So again, I don't really disagree with a lot of Lupe's points, and I like that he's, spreading this message and giving it to his listeners, and a lot of them take it seriously. But I mean, me instrumentally, and maybe even philosophically too, I'm just going to kind of hang with the league of great socially conscious rappers to come before Lupe: Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Black Star, Boogie Down Productions, A Tribe Called Quest, Public Enemy, The Roots, Common. And despite the fact that a lot of those artists are older, let's be honest, a lot of the problems that they rapped about are still kind of problems. So to be completely honest, I'm really feeling a strong 4 to a light 5 on this album. Definitely improvement over Lasers, but Lupe really needs to get back to picking some good production. Did you love this LP? Did you hate it? Why? And what should I review next? Anthony Fantano, Lupe Fiasco, Food and Liquor, 2, Forever.